My name is Clara Byrne. For the first 20 years of my life, I believed that was a name rooted in the rich, dark soil of family, a name that meant belonging. For the last 10, I've come to understand that a name is simply a word you are given, and it's up to you to give it meaning. I live in Port Blossom, a city that clings to the coast, perpetually damp and green, where the scent of rain on pine needles is the city's unofficial perfume. I'm a palliative care nurse. I spend my days in the quiet spaces where life prepares to transition, holding hands, managing pain, and listening to stories. It is gentle, demanding work. It is, to my mind, profoundly important. My father, Arthur Byrne, has never understood it. He is a man carved from granite and ambition, a creature of the financial district, where worth is measured in quarterly earnings and stock portfolios. He breathes the rarefied air of boardrooms and lives in a world of clean lines, sharp suits, and muted, expensive colors. My world of quiet rooms, antiseptic smells, and the raw, untidy landscape of human emotion is, to him, a foreign and somewhat disappointing country. Our paths diverged long ago, when I chose a nursing program at the state college over a business degree at the university he'd selected for me. The chasm between us widened when he married Diana, a woman for whom life was a series of strategic social maneuvers. And it became a veritable canyon with the arrival of her son, Leo, into our lives. Leo, with his easy charm and a mind that saw the world as a series of opportunities to be monetized, was the son my father had always wanted. He spoke Leo's language. They shared a blueprint for what a successful life looked like. I, on the other hand, was an anomaly, a strange, sentimental tributary that had branched off from the mighty river of his expectations. He was polite about it, always. Arthur Byrne was never anything less than impeccably polite. But his pride was a light he shone only on Leo. When people asked about his son, my father's face would illuminate. He'd speak of Leo's latest tech venture, the seed money he'd secured, the brilliant future that was not so much a possibility as an inevitability. When people asked about me, a polite, almost imperceptible film would fall over his eyes. Clara? Oh, she's doing her own thing. In healthcare. The conversation would then be deftly steered back to more impressive topics. Doing her own thing. It was a verbal pat on the head, a gentle dismissal that relegated my life's work to a quaint, little hobby. For years, I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I was building a life on my own terms, a life of substance and meaning that he simply couldn't comprehend. And I was. But a small, stubborn part of me, the child who had once believed her name meant belonging, still yearned for a glimmer of that light to be shone on her. The wedding was supposed to be a new beginning for him and Diana. For me, it was just another event to be navigated with a pleasant, neutral expression. It was held at the Celestine, a restored Art Deco hotel downtown, all gleaming marble and geometric brass fixtures. The air was heavy with the cloying scent of white lilies and the low thrum of a string quartet. I had chosen my dress with Korea deep emerald silk that complemented the city's perpetual green, and I had practiced my smile in the mirror. I was prepared to perform my role as the dutiful daughter. I wasn't expecting to be a bridesmaid. Diana had her own circle. I wasn't expecting a special toast. But I suppose I was expecting proximity. A symbolic acknowledgement that I was his. The seating chart was displayed on an ornate easel near the entrance to the grand ballroom. It was a masterpiece of calligraphy on thick, cream-colored cardstock. I scanned the names, my finger hovering just above the surface. The head table, Arthur and Diana Byrne. Leo and Sophie Sterling. Mr. and Mrs. Davenport, Diana's parents. Mr. Marcus Thorne, Leo's venture capitalist. It was a table of alliances, a merger of family and finance. My eyes continued their search, moving past table 2, table 3, past colleagues and business partners. I found my name near the very bottom of the list. Table 18, MS. Clara Byrne. I scanned the other names at my designated table. A few vaguely familiar Byrne cousins, ones I hadn't seen since a family reunion a decade ago. People who likely wouldn't recognize me. I was seated at the back of the enormous room, near the kitchens, a geographical representation of my place in this new family structure, an afterthought. A cold, quiet stillness settled over me. It wasn't the fiery shock of an unexpected blow, but the deep, hollow ache of a truth I had long suspected finally being confirmed in elegant, swirling ink. "There you are." Diana's voice, effervescent and sharp, cut through my thoughts. She glided towards me, a vision in champagne silk, a flute of matching liquid in her hand. She followed my gaze to the chart. Yes," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. The seating was such a puzzle. We had so many important partners of Arthur's and Leo's to consider. We had to prioritize, you know. She said it so simply, so reasonably, as if explaining why the fish was served before the beef. We had to prioritize. And I was not a priority. It was a statement of fact. I looked past her, searching for my father. He was standing a few feet away, deep in conversation with Mr. Thorne, the venture capitalist. He laughed at something the man said, a full, genuine sound I hadn't heard directed at me in years. He caught my eye for a fleeting second. There was no flicker of concern, no dawning realization of what this seating arrangement might communicate to his only daughter. There was only a brief, distracted nod before his attention was reclaimed by the man who represented Leo's bright future. And that was it. Not the table number. Not Diana's clinical smile. It was that glance. That casual, weightless, utterly indifferent glance. To him, nothing was wrong. My placement at the edge of his new world was as natural and unquestionable as the tides. He hadn't just forgotten me. He had, in a way, unfathomed me. A strange calm washed over me, displacing the ache. The years of trying, of hoping, of making excuses for the 1,000 tiny cuts of his dismissal, they all fell away. I smoothed the front of my emerald dress, my hand steady. I met Diana's gaze and gave her a small, genuine nod. "Thank you," I said, my voice even and clear. "Thanks for making it so easy." Her brow furrowed in faint confusion. Before she could formulate a response, I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. I walked out of the opulent lobby, my heels clicking a quiet, resolute rhythm on the marble floor. The doorman, sensing my purpose, held the heavy glass door open for me. The cool, damp port blossom air felt like a benediction on my face. I walked to my car, a sensible, reliable sedan parked 3 blocks away in a public garage. My hands didn't shake as I inserted the key into the ignition. I had spent so long bracing for a moment like this, imagining it would shatter me. I'd envisioned tears, rage, a messy, dramatic scene. Instead, there was only this profound, unnerving peace. It was the relief of a patient finally receiving a definitive diagnosis after years of vague, unsettling symptoms. The ambiguity was gone. They had shown me, in the clearest terms possible, exactly where I stood. And for the first time, I had the courage to believe them. I sat in my car for a long moment in the concrete stillness of the garage, watching the rain begin to streak the windscreen. I expected my phone to buzz, to light up with a text from my father asking where I'd gone, or perhaps a call from my aunt, a born peacemaker. But there was only silence. Inside the Celestine, they were raising glasses, laughing, dancing, celebrating the seamless consolidation of their lives. No one had even noticed I was gone. A small, humorless laugh escaped my lips. It was so utterly, tragically predictable. I started the engine and pulled out of the garage, merging into the glistening evening traffic. With every mile that separated me from that grand ballroom, I felt a weight I hadn't fully realized I was carrying begin to lift. It was the crushing weight of unreciprocated effort, of trying to earn a love that was supposed to be unconditional. And I had finally set it down. The truth is, my life had been a long, slow rehearsal for that departure. The rift between my father and me wasn't a sudden event, but a gradual erosion, like a riverbank slowly worn away by a relentless current. Even before Diana, before Leo became the center of his orbit, the disconnect was there. It began with my choice of career. I was a good student, sharp and inquisitive. My father, with his unshakable faith in capitalism, had always envisioned a path for me paved with billable hours and corner offices. Law, finance, corporate management, these were serious pursuits. When I announced my intention to become a nurse, his reaction wasn't anger, but a deep, weary sigh, as if I'd just confessed a plan to join a traveling circus. "Clara, think about it," he'd said, sitting across from me in his study, the room smelling of old leather and accomplishment. "The hours are brutal, the pay is mediocre. You'll be surrounded by sickness and sadness. You're setting yourself up for a life of struggle. I want to help people, Dad," I'd argued, my teenage idealism a bright, fragile shield. "I want my work to mean something." "You can help people as a surgeon," he'd countered, missing the point entirely. "You could run a hospital. Why would you choose to be on the front lines, doing the hardest work for the least reward?" That was his lens. My choice wasn't noble, it was a failure of ambition. From that day on, a subtle wall went up. He never asked about my clinical rotations, my challenging coursework, or the profound moments in the hospital that were shaping me. But when Leo, still in college, drafted a business plan for a food delivery app, my father was galvanized. He invested a significant sum, his seed money, he'd called it proudly. He connected Leo with mentors. He spoke of his son's vision to anyone who would listen. Leo was building something. I was just coping. This pattern became the unspoken rhythm of our family. When Leo's first venture failed, my father bailed him out, calling it a valuable learning experience. When I struggled to make rent while working part-time and studying full-time, I received a lecture on budgeting and the consequences of my life choices. So, I learned to rely on myself. I took on extra shifts, became an expert at stretching a dollar, and built a life independent of his approval or support. And yet, the irony was that I was the one he turned to for the things his money couldn't easily buy. When his blood pressure began to creep into the danger zone, it was me he called, not for emotional support, but for a quick check. I was the one who explained his new medications to him, who drove him to a follow-up appointment after a minor surgical procedure, who calmly interpreted the doctor's jargon for him and Diana. Each time, he would tolerate my help with a dismissive air. "It's just a precaution, I'm fine. Don't make such a fuss, Clara. It's not like you're a surgeon, but I suppose this is useful." I should have stopped then. I should have recognized that my skills were only valuable to him when they were convenient and free. But the stubborn hope persisted. He's my father. That has to mean something. Sitting in my quiet apartment that night, the scent of the rain outside replacing the memory of the lilies, I finally accepted the truth. It didn't have to mean anything at all. I kicked off my beautiful, uncomfortable shoes, ordered a pizza, and curled up on the sofa. I expected to feel a storm of emotion, anger, sorrow, regret. Instead, there was only a quiet hum. The hum of a machine that has finally been turned off after running too hard for too long. The first message arrived the next morning. It was from my Aunt Helen, my father's sister. "Sweetheart, are you okay? We missed you last night." She was kind, but her loyalty was always, inevitably, to him. I read the message and set my phone down. A few hours later, a text from a cousin who had been at table 18. "Hey, saw you leave. Everything all right?" I ignored that one too. Finally, late in the afternoon, a message from my father. 4 words. "We need to talk." No apology. No concern. Just a summons. I looked at the message, the bluntness of it, the utter lack of self-awareness. I didn't reply. I simply read it, and in that moment, I felt the last frayed thread of obligation snap. The days that followed were surprisingly light. The constant, low-level anxiety that had been my companion for years, the mental gymnastics of anticipating my father's moods, of bracing for the next subtle slight, was gone. In its absence, there was space. Space to breathe. Space to simply be. I took on an extra shift at the hospice, losing myself in the focused, compassionate rhythm of my work. I had coffee with a friend and talked about books and travel, not family drama. I bought a new, ridiculously oversized fern for my living room and spent an hour finding the perfect spot for it. My life, The one he considered small felt expansive and full of potential. A week after the wedding, Aunt Helen called. This time I answered. "Clara, you need to talk to your father," she said, her voice strained with worry. I waited, letting the silence stretch. She sighed, a sound heavy with familial obligation. "He's in the hospital." A dry, humorless laugh almost escaped me. "Of course he was." "He's stable," she added quickly, as if sensing my cynicism. "A hypertensive crisis." His pressure went through the roof. "But Clara, he needs help when he gets out." Note the phrasing. Not, "he misses you." Not, "he feels terrible about what happened." Just, "he needs help." It was a transactional request disguised as a family crisis. "What kind of help?" I asked, my voice devoid of the sympathy she was expecting. "You know, monitoring him. Making sure he takes his medication properly. Diana is overwhelmed, and Leo is in the middle of a big product launch. So they need a nurse," I stated flatly. "Well, you're his daughter." "At the wedding, I was a distant cousin," I replied, the words falling like ice chips into the phone. "Am I family now that there are medical bills involved?" There was a long pause. "That's not fair, Clara." "No, it's not," I agreed. "But it's the truth." The role of daughter was already filled at the head table. The role of unpaid caregiver, however, seems to have just opened up. "I'm declining the offer." Before she could protest further, I gently ended the call. The family-wide emergency alert system went into overdrive. I received a curt, demanding text from Leo, which I deleted without reading. Diana left a rambling, tearful voicemail about how this stress was affecting her health. I deleted that too. My father texted again. "Clara, I need you." The shift from "we need to talk" to "I need you" was telling. It was still all about his needs. He was discharged a few days later with a strict regimen of medication, diet, and regular blood pressure monitoring. The care he needed was exactly the kind of support I had provided for years, for free. Now, faced with the prospect of hiring a private home care nurse, the cost became a sudden, stark reality. Diana tried one last time, calling me on a Saturday morning. "Clara, I really think it's time we put the past behind us and acted like a family," she began, her tone dripping with manufactured sincerity. I took a slow sip of my coffee. "That's a fascinating proposal, Diana. A few weeks ago, family meant a front row seat for your son and a back corner table for me. Has the definition changed?" A brittle silence crackled over the line. "So, which is it?" I pressed, my voice calm. "Am I family, or am I a contingency plan? You don't get to have it both ways." "He's your father," she sputtered, her composure finally cracking. "And you're his wife," I countered. "And Leo is his prized son. It sounds like a problem for the priority family to solve. I wish you the best of luck." I hung up the phone and blocked her number. Then I blocked Leo's. For a long time after that, my phone remained blessedly silent. I heard through Aunt Helen that they had hired a nurse, an agency professional who charged $100 an hour. The cost was, apparently, a source of great stress and resentment. Leo, despite his successful venture, contributed nothing. It was not, he'd apparently argued, a sound investment. I felt no satisfaction in their struggle. I felt no anger. I simply felt the quiet, steady peace of a boundary held. I had spent my life trying to get a seat at their table. Now, I was finally content to be sitting at my own. Months bled into a year, and the landscape of my life transformed. Without the constant drain of my family's drama, my energy returned, bright and clear. I found I had more to give to my patients, my friends, and most importantly, to myself. I started a small pottery class on Tuesday nights, discovering a quiet joy in the messy, imperfect process of shaping clay. The small, lopsided bowls and mugs I made filled my kitchen shelves, tangible proof of a life being built with my own hands. I took a trip to the coast, spending a long weekend in a tiny cabin overlooking the Pacific. I walked for hours on the windswept beach, the roar of the ocean a powerful, cleansing sound. I read books, slept deeply, and felt a sense of self-possession I hadn't known was possible. This was the small life my father had pitted, and it felt boundless. I still heard news of him in filtered snippets from Aunt Helen. He and Diana had been forced to downsize, selling the grand house he'd been so proud of for a cramped condo in a less desirable part of the city. The cost of his ongoing medical care was a relentless burden. Leo remained distant, a satellite in a far-flung, prosperous orbit, too busy to visit, too strategic to help financially. The family unit my father had so carefully constructed around success and ambition was proving to be remarkably brittle under pressure. One crisp autumn afternoon, about 2 years after the wedding, I was in my favorite neighborhood coffee shop, a cozy place called The Daily Grind, when the bell over the door chimed. I glanced up from my book and my heart gave a dull, heavy thud. It was Leo. He was immaculate in a tailored charcoal suit, his hair perfectly styled, an expensive watch gleaming on his wrist. He radiated the frictionless confidence of a man for whom the world had always rolled out a red carpet. He saw me before I could retreat. His face broke into a smooth, practiced smile. "Clara. Well, look at you." I gave him a cool, polite nod. "Leo." His eyes swept over my comfortable sweater and jeans. "Still living the simple life, I see." It wasn't a question. It was a judgment. "It's a peaceful life," I said, my voice even. I refused to be provoked. He ordered a complicated espresso drink, his voice loud and assured. After he paid, he turned back to me, leaning against the counter. "Heard you're still not talking to the old man." "And I've heard you're still not returning his calls," I countered gently. The smile vanished from his face. A flicker of something annoyance, guilt, crossed his features. "What do you want me to do, Clara?" He made his choices. He mismanaged his finances. It's not my responsibility to fix his mistakes. A cold anger, something I hadn't felt in a long time, stirred within me. It wasn't just about my father anymore. It was about the profound, staggering arrogance of the man in front of me. "His biggest mistake was investing everything he had in you," I said, my voice low and steady. I watched the words land. "Not just his money, Leo. His pride. His belief. His attention. He cleared the table for you. And now that he needs something back, your portfolio has no room for him. It's a shame the return on his investment is so poor." He stared at me, his jaw tight. For once, the smooth, charismatic facade had cracked, and behind it was someone small and defensive. He had no response. There was no clever retort, no business analogy that could justify his neglect. "You didn't help him either," he finally mumbled, a child's retort. "No, I didn't," I agreed, gathering my book and standing up. "He made it very clear I wasn't the daughter he wanted." "But what's your excuse, Leo?" "He made you the son he always dreamed of." I left him standing there, his expensive coffee growing cold in his hand. Walking out into the crisp air, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt a deep, weary sadness for the man my father had become, and for the son he had chosen. He had built his family on a foundation of shifting sand, and now the tide was coming in. Another year passed. The news from Aunt Helen became more sporadic and more grim. My father's health had taken a significant downturn after a fall. The condo was gone. Diana, unable to cope with the physical and financial strain of being a full-time caregiver, had placed him in a long-term care facility. "It's not one of the good ones, Clara," Helen told me over the phone, her voice heavy. "It's all they can afford. It's clean, I suppose. But it's bleak." Leo, now the CEO of a company that had just been featured in a national business magazine, had apparently visited once, declared the place depressing, and hadn't been back. The question hung in the air between my aunt and me, unspoken. "Will you go?" I thought about it more than I wanted to admit. I pictured myself walking down a sterile, linoleum hallway that smelled of disinfectant and despair. I imagined seeing him, diminished and frail, in a narrow bed by a smudged window. I played out the conversation in my head. Would he finally apologize? Would he acknowledge the years of hurt? But I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that he wouldn't. He would see me, and his eyes would light up with a flicker of the old hope, not hope for reconciliation, but hope for rescue. He would see my capable hands and my nurse's instincts, and he would see a solution to his problem. The dynamic would reset instantly. I would be pulled back into the role of caregiver, the fixer, the one who was expected to tidy up the emotional and physical wreckage of his life. The peace I had so carefully cultivated over the past 3 years felt fragile in the face of that possibility. It was a tender, new growth, and returning to him would be like exposing it to a killing frost. My self-respect was not a weapon to be brandished, it was a sanctuary to be protected. And I would not, tear it down for a man who had never helped me lay a single stone. I told Helen, gently but firmly, that I wouldn't be visiting. I made my peace with him a long time ago, Aunt Helen, I said. Just not in the way you think. She was disappointed, but she understood. Or at least, she accepted it. One evening, I was home after a long shift, tending to my plants, my own quiet form of therapy. My phone chimed with a text from an unknown number. My heart seized for a moment before I read the words. It was the lawyer's office for his estate. Dad passed away peacefully in his sleep last night. The funeral is private. Just thought you should know. Helen. I sank onto my sofa, the phone feeling heavy in my hand. I stared at the message, at the finality of it. I waited for the tears, for the gut-wrenching grief, for the tidal wave of guilt and regret. But none of it came. There was no storm. There was only a profound stillness, a quiet emptiness where a complicated, painful love used to be. The dominant feeling was a hollow sort of sorrow, not for the man who had died, but for the father-daughter relationship that had died so many years before. I was mourning an absence that had long been present. I typed back a simple reply, "Thank you for letting me know. I hope you're doing okay." I put my phone down, walked over to the window, and looked out at the lights of Port Blossom twinkling in the misty darkness. My father had built his legacy on a foundation of misplaced priorities. He had chosen the son who reflected his ambitions over the daughter who offered her heart. He had received, in the end, exactly what he had built, a life of transactional relationships that dissolved when he had nothing left to offer. My legacy was different. It was in the quiet rooms where I eased the suffering of strangers. It was in the lopsided mugs on my shelf, the laughter of my friends, the deep green of the fern in my living room. It was a life built not on what I could acquire, but on what I could give to others and, finally, to myself. A month later, a small, square package arrived in the mail. There was no return address, but I recognized Aunt Helen's neat handwriting. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a single, silver-framed photograph. It was of me, aged about 5, sitting on my father's shoulders at a local fair. My hair was in messy pigtails, and I was laughing, my head thrown back in pure, uncomplicated joy. He was looking up at me, and his face, young and unburdened by the man he would become, was filled with an expression of such absolute, unguarded adoration that it took my breath away. This was the father I had lost long before he died. Tears, hot and sudden, finally pricked my eyes. They weren't tears of regret for walking away, but tears of grief for this man, for this little girl, for the love that had been real before it was replaced by something lesser. I held the photo for a long time, tracing the outline of his smiling face. Then I walked over to my bookshelf, a space filled with my stories, my pottery, my life. I found a place for the frame, not at the front, but not hidden away either. It was a quiet acknowledgement of where I came from, a single note of memory in the richer, more complex symphony of the life I had chosen to compose for myself. I could look at it now and feel a gentle sorrow for what was lost, without letting it diminish the peace I had found. My name was Clara Byrne, and I had finally given it my own meaning. It meant resilience. It meant peace. It meant I was home.